Sup, my fellas, don't forget to leave feedback and enjoy the story. While the waves of the sea were crashing, Lu Sheng and the Supreme Martial Saint began to stare at each other in silence. Despite having his mind full of rage, Zhao remained calm, and with a serene expression extended his hand toward Lu Sheng and began to use the skill called Blue Sea, causing his body to start emitting an orange-colored energy. In the blink of an eye, the seawater began to float and concentrate in Zhao Jai's hand. He had so much power that he could fight alone against the entire army. While Zhao Jai was preparing to attack, Lu Sheng began to observe and his eyes filled with surprise, and he could not help but feel fear as he knew what the power of the martial saint was capable of. Then, a powerful golden tornado formed around Zhao Jai's body, causing the surrounding water to shoot out to the sides. Lu Sheng, who was watching this, couldn't help but step back. Zhao Jai began to gaze at the ground and started concentrating the energy of the tornado and water into his hand. His eyes began to shine with hatred and with an expression thirsty for revenge. He thought that this level of strength was more than enough for Lu Sheng to die easily. Zhao Jai's energy began to expand everywhere. Lu Sheng's gaze filled with rage upon seeing so much power. He couldn't help but clench his teeth tightly, not knowing what to do now or how to defend himself from the attack without dying in the attempt. The martial saint prepared to attack, and his body was emitting such a strong energy that the sea water was lowering its level. Upon seeing Zhao Jai's power, the northern marshal couldn't help but be somewhat surprised and open-mouthed at the same time. The other marshals covered their eyes with their arms to avoid going blind. Everyone knew that Lu Sheng had no chance of winning, so they advised him to flee as soon as possible. Lu Sheng paid no attention and stood firm, ready to receive the attack. He was not willing to flee like a coward without fighting. Upon seeing that the marshals were advising him to escape, Zhao Jai began staring intently at our boy with a serious expression, clenched his fist tightly, and while he was releasing the energy of the tornado and water, he decided it was time to finish off Lu Sheng once and for all. He attacked Lu Sheng, launching a powerful burst of energy toward him, revealing that no one could escape the attack. The burst of energy transformed into a powerful dragon made of fire. It opened its mouth and began roaring. The dragon was releasing an evil energy. Instead of trying to dodge the attack, Lu Sheng stood still. He started observing the dragon and soon realized that Zhao Jai could gather in his palm all the cosmic energies scattered between heaven and earth. The power he now possessed had reached an incredibly terrifying level. While the attack was approaching, Lu Sheng's eyes filled with fear and unease. He clenched his teeth tightly without knowing what to do now. The dragon moved at the speed of light, making the sky turn red. It charged towards our boy. Lu Sheng spread his legs and put his hand in front of his face to defend himself from the attack. Zhao Jai's combat power was estimated to be 200 stars, but now it had even surpassed 400 and it was impossible to determine his true level of strength. Lu Sheng's eyes filled with rage. He clenched his teeth tightly and finally realized the difference between him and a true martial saint. Our boy was not going to stand idly by doing nothing. He started running towards the attack and filled himself with determination. He activated the incomparable state, the divine manifestation of the whale, the killer manifestation, and the state of the god of war, causing thunder to appear around his body. The dragon appeared in front of him, opened its mouth and prepared to take his life. Lu Sheng moved his hand quickly, transforming it into a sharp energy sword and counterattacked using the technique of the war saint called Will of the Sword. The attacks clashed against each other, making energies of all kinds appear. Lu Sheng began to observe this, and his expression changed. His eyes filled with rage, causing him to clench his teeth tightly due to despair. Eventually, the power of Zhao Jai ended up taking the lead. The current power of Lu Sheng was not comparable to that of a martial saint, and therefore our boy lost, creating a small explosion. Once the smoke curtain disappeared, it could be seen that Lu Sheng had lost an arm and was seriously injured, but even so he was standing with an angry expression. He lowered his head and couldn't help but feel rage upon seeing that he had been completely defeated. The Eastern Marshal moved his arms away from his face, and upon seeing that Lu Sheng was gravely injured, he couldn't help but start sweating and feeling worried for him. The Marshal of the Central District, who was next to him, began to observe Lu Sheng, and his eyes filled with surprise. He was speechless upon seeing that our boy had been able to withstand the attack and was still alive. The high-ranking military officials who were watching the combat from the ship were in shock and very afraid. General Star Lu Sheng, who could defeat the Eastern Emperor, had been annihilated without much effort by the extreme martial saint. Everyone realized that compared to martial saints, they were all mere ants. Lu Sheng started bleeding due to his injuries, and because of a lack of power, he began falling toward the sea. Our boy's body submerged into the water and started sinking toward the bottom. While the entire army was trying to understand what had just happened, someone descended to the ground near the ships. It was the Martial Saint Zhao Jai. He began to gaze toward the area where our boy's body had fallen, and several seconds later, with a serious expression, declared that this fight was over. The marshals were in shock. The marshal of the central district placed his hands near his chest, and his eyes filled with fear upon seeing the true power of the Martial Saint. Meanwhile, on the other side, the Eastern Marshal couldn't help but clench his teeth tightly out of hatred. The hope that the army had been waiting for more than 100 years had now vanished, and they hadn't been able to do anything about it. He could not believe that Lu Sheng had died, so without wasting a second, consumed by despair, he jumped into the water to try to save him. They could not let our boy die in this way. He wanted to go and search, even if it was just for his corpse. The marshal of the central district extended his hand toward him and first tried to stop him, but then decided not to. The Martial Saint Zhao Jai began to fly, turned his back on everyone, closed his eyes, and with a confident smile explained that the attack from a moment ago contained the great power of heaven and earth, and unless Lu Sheng possessed a body comparable to that of a martial saint, he would be reduced to ashes. Several minutes had passed since Lu Sheng had fallen into the water, so Zhao Jai thought this matter was over and believed it was time to leave. But at that moment, Zhao Jai began to feel a strange energy. He opened his eyes and couldn't help but be somewhat surprised without knowing what was really happening. He stopped in place, began to gaze at the ground with a lost expression, and remained silent without making any movement. Just then, the water shot up into the sky, creating a great wave behind the martial saint. At first, Zhao Jai remained silent without understanding the situation. But then, he turned around, started observing the wave with a serene expression, and his eyes filled with surprise upon feeling that Lu Sheng was still alive. He got angry, extended his hand toward the wave, and using his power, broke it in half, explaining that he was already tired of this tricks. The expression of the martial saint changed. His eyes filled with emotion, and a smile appeared on his face as he realized something. Once the wave broke, the water began to fall into the sea, and in the middle was Lu Sheng flying, who now was missing an arm. Upon seeing Lu Sheng alive, the eyes of the Eastern Marshal filled with happiness, and a smile appeared on his face. He couldn't help but clench his fists tightly due to the emotion. The Central District Marshal also clenched his fists, and couldn't help but smile, thinking that our boy was very strong. The soldier behind them began to smile, and a light of hope appeared in his eyes. Without wasting a second, the marshals started flying until they reached where Lu Sheng was. They clenched their fists tightly, began releasing energy, and formed a circle around Lu Sheng. They were willing to risk their lives to stop the martial saint, even if only for a few seconds. The marshal of the east began to stare at Zhao Jai with an angry gaze, clenched his teeth, and revealed that Lu Sheng could not die as he was the hope of the army. Our boy, who was standing in the middle, began to look down silently, thinking about what to do now. At that moment, someone placed a hand on the shoulder of the Eastern Marshal. Feeling this, he turned his head back, and upon seeing the hand, his eyes filled with surprise. He did not know what was happening. It was Lu Sheng's hand. Despite being injured, he began to smile, explaining that it was not necessary for them to intervene. Upon hearing this, the Marshal of the East couldn't help but get angry, not knowing whether to trust him or not. Lu Sheng extended his hand to one side and began to use his power, causing a magic circle to appear beneath him. Little by little, his less severe wounds started healing. And then, in the blink of an eye, the arm that our boy had lost due to the Martial Saint's attack reappeared as if nothing had happened. Lu Sheng clenched his fists tightly, and his body began to emit a powerful energy. Seeing this, the eyes of the Marshal of the East filled with happiness, and he couldn't help but smile upon seeing that our boy had recovered. The other Marshal and the soldier started observing our boy and couldn't help but be left speechless. With a smile, they praised him for having an impressive regeneration ability. Lu Sheng grabbed his wrist with his hand and clenched his fist. The Martial Saint approached them, and his attention focused on Lu Sheng. For him, this was very interesting. He put one hand behind his back, extended the other toward Lu Sheng. He began to look at our boy with a cheerful gaze and started to smile. It had been a long time since he had seen someone so interesting. Now that Lu Sheng had eliminated the 4 symbols and had been able to withstand an attack from him, it showed that his talent was extraordinary. He decided to make a deal with our boy. If he joined his sect and respected him as master, he guaranteed that Lu Sheng would ascend to the rank of Martial Saint within 100 years. This was a very tempting offer. All the marshals were in shock and dumbfounded at the same time. They couldn't believe that the Martial Saint was recruiting Lu Sheng, something that had never happened before. Lu Sheng turned his back on everyone and remained silent. The marshal's eyes were full of confusion, leaving him speechless. He began to look at our boy without knowing what he was doing or why he wasn't accepting the martial saint's deal. Zhao Jai had promised to spare his life, but in exchange, our boy had to bow his head. No one knew what Lu Sheng was going to do now. Lu Sheng let out a sigh and couldn't help but smile. He started staring intently at the martial saint with an arrogant expression, pointing at him with his finger and mocking him for trying to recruit someone like him with such weak power strength. He asked if he had used all his power in the last attack. He couldn't believe that Zhao Jai was considered a martial saint. Upon hearing this, the marshals couldn't help but be left speechless. He had not only rejected the offer of the martial saint but had also mocked him. Lu Sheng's eyes filled with determination. He extended his hand backward and began to create a ball of energy. With a smile, he decided to show the martial saint true power. Seeing this, Zhao Jai's expression changed. With a surprised look, he began to wonder what was happening. Lu Sheng used the power of the blue sea and sky, causing a powerful giant golden tornado to appear, which began stirring the sea. The martial saint started observing our boy's power in silence. Lu Sheng began using his power and started gathering the energy of the tornado in the palm of his hand. His attention fixed on Zhao Jai, and with a confident smile admitted that he could not resist the celestial force power of the martial saint. However, unfortunately, his power was too weak to kill him, revealing that he had stolen this attack from him. While Lu Sheng was concentrating the energy, Zhao Jai began observing and his eyes filled with confusion. He couldn't help but go into shock without understanding how it was that Lu Sheng could also use the power of heaven and earth. He began to feel fear, and with a gaze full of terror, he thought that this was impossible since Lu Sheng was only a level 8 master, who could only harness the power of heaven and earth. Lu Sheng started staring at him intently and with a revenge-thirsty smile asked why he was so surprised. Zhao Jai had not been able to kill him even with his best move, and now everything seemed incomprehensible. Our boy decided to answer his questions, revealing that power only submits to a stronger power, something he called over